In a world not too different from our own, humanity found itself on the edge of survival. The skies were gray, the air was thick with pollution, and resources were running out faster than anyone could replace them. Governments had tried everything: rationing, food, cutting energy usage, even sending people to live in space colonies. But nothing seemed to work. Desperation had taken hold, and with it came new ideas, some more extreme than others. One such idea was born in a secret facility buried deep beneath the Earth. It was called the Vault Initiative, and its goal was simple yet terrifying: to find the smartest, strongest, and most resourceful people who could solve problems under impossible conditions. These individuals would then be tasked with leading humanity into a better future, or so the story went. In reality, the initiative was as much about control as it was about survival. Those chosen for the test would face challenges that pushed them to their limits, both mentally and physically. If they failed, they might never see the outside world again. Emma Carter never imagined she'd be one of those chosen. She was just an ordinary woman living an ordinary life in a small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. At 28, she worked as a librarian, spending her days surrounded by books and her nights watching old movies with her younger brother Sam. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable, until the letter arrived. It came early one morning, slipped under her door while she was still asleep. The envelope was plain white with no return address, but inside was a single sheet of paper printed with bold black letters. "You have been selected to participate in the Vault Initiative," it read. "Your attendance is mandatory. Failure to comply will result in severe consequences." Emma stared at the words for a long time, her heart pounding. Mandatory? What did that even mean? And why her? She wasn't special, not like the scientists or engineers she sometimes read about in the news. Still, the letter made it clear there was no room for refusal. When she showed it to Sam later that day, he looked just as confused as she felt. "They can't force you to do this," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Everyone knew what happened to people who defied the government these days. Fines, imprisonment, worse, it was all possible. Reluctantly, Emma decided to go. The letter promised that success in the trial would secure her family's place in the new order, whatever that meant. For Sam's sake, she couldn't say no. So 2 days later, she packed a small bag and headed to the address listed on the paper, a nondescript building downtown that looked like any other office complex. Inside, she was greeted by a man in a dark suit who introduced himself as Agent Miller. He led her to a waiting area where several other candidates sat nervously on plastic chairs. There was Daniel Brooks, a tall man with broad shoulders and a military haircut, who kept glancing at his watch. Across from him sat Rachel Moore, a petite woman with glasses and a notebook filled with scribbles. In the corner, typing furiously on a tablet, was Lucas Gray, a young man with messy hair and a hoodie pulled up over his head. No one spoke much at first, but as the minutes dragged on, introductions were exchanged. Daniel claimed he'd been recruited because of his experience as a soldier. Rachel mentioned something about working in a lab before being laid off. Lucas, on the other hand, didn't offer much information beyond muttering something about hacking networks. Emma stayed quiet, unsure of how much to share. Eventually, Agent Miller returned and ushered them into a large briefing room. At the front stood Dr. Alan Hayes, a wiry man with sharp features and cold eyes. He introduced himself as the director of the Vault Initiative and wasted no time getting to the point. "Welcome," he began, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. "You've been brought here because you possess qualities essential to humanity's survival. Over the next 12 hours, you will face a series of challenges designed to test your intelligence, adaptability, and resilience. Success will grant you immunity from the hardships facing the rest of society. Failure." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "Failure means you will remain here indefinitely." A murmur rippled through the group, but Hayes ignored it. Instead, he gestured to the screens behind him, which flickered to life, displaying images of a labyrinthine structure filled with strange machines and glowing panels. "This is the vault," he explained. "It is your battlefield, your puzzle, your prison. Work together if you must, but remember, only the best will prevail. With that ominous warning, the group was led to another room where they were each handed a wristband. The devices were sleek and metallic, fitting snugly around their wrists like cuffs. A soft beep signaled that they were active, and a holographic display appeared above each band, showing a countdown timer set to 12 hours. As the heavy doors of the vault slid open with a low groan, Emma felt a chill run down her spine. The air inside was cool and sterile, and the walls gleamed with polished metal. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, clinical glow. One by one, the group stepped inside, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. Daniel took the lead almost immediately, his confidence evident as he scanned the room for clues. Rachel lingered near the entrance, clutching her notebook tightly, while Lucas wandered off to inspect a panel on the wall. Emma hung back, taking in the details. Something about the setup felt wrong, too calculated, too precise. But she didn't have time to dwell on it. The first challenge appeared sooner than expected. A series of holograms materialized in the center of the room, displaying a jumble of numbers and symbols. Daniel frowned, stepping closer to examine them, but it was Emma who noticed the pattern first. She tilted her head, studying the arrangement carefully. Numbers repeated in sequences, forming shapes that reminded her of constellations. "It's a code," she said softly, surprising even herself. The others turned to look at her, and for a moment she felt exposed. But then Daniel nodded, urging her to continue. "What kind of code?" he asked. Emma hesitated, tracing the lines in her mind. "It's mathematical, like algebra, but layered. If we solve it, maybe it'll unlock the next part." Her explanation earned a raised eyebrow from Lucas, but Rachel leaned in, intrigued. Together, they pieced the puzzle together, feeding off each other's insights. It wasn't easy. There were moments when frustration bubbled over, especially from Daniel. But eventually, Emma cracked the sequence. With a satisfying click, a hidden door slid open, revealing a narrow hallway bathed in red light. "Well, done," Daniel said grudgingly, though his tone suggested he wasn't used to sharing credit. Emma simply smiled faintly and moved forward, already bracing herself for whatever lay ahead. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. The narrow hallway stretched ahead of them, dimly lit by pulsating red lights that cast eerie shadows on the walls. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the vault, and the silence was broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing off the metal surfaces. Emma walked cautiously, her eyes scanning every inch of the corridor for clues or hidden dangers. Behind her, Daniel kept a steady pace, his arms crossed as if ready for anything. Rachel clutched her notebook tightly, scribbling notes about the environment while Lucas trailed behind, muttering to himself as he tapped furiously on his tablet. At the end of the hallway, they reached another door. Unlike the first one, this one wasn't marked with any symbols or instructions. Instead, it had a keypad embedded in the wall next to it, along with a small screen displaying a blinking cursor. Emma stepped closer, studying the setup carefully. "It looks like we need a password," she said, glancing back at the group. Daniel frowned. "How are we supposed to know what it is? There's no hint here." Rachel adjusted her glasses and leaned in. "Maybe it's based on something we've already seen, like the numbers from the first puzzle." Emma nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Let me try." She entered the sequence of numbers she'd solved earlier, but the screen flashed. Red, and an electronic voice announced, "Access denied." "Great," Lucas muttered sarcastically. "Now what?" Before anyone could respond, the floor beneath them trembled slightly, and a low hum filled the air. Panels on the ceiling slid open, revealing rows of robotic arms tipped with sharp blades. They began moving slowly, sweeping back and forth across the corridor like mechanical pendulums. "We don't have time to argue," Emma exclaimed, stepping back toward the group. "We need to figure this out fast." Daniel took charge, positioning himself near the keypad. "Everyone think, what else could it be?" Lucas squinted at the screen. "It's not just numbers. Look, the cursor is waiting for letters too. Maybe it's a word." Rachel flipped through her notebook, reviewing the patterns they'd encountered so far. What about constellation? That's what the first puzzle reminded Emma of. Emma hesitated, then typed the word into the keypad. The screen flashed green, and the robotic arms retracted into the ceiling with a hiss. The door slid open, revealing a large chamber beyond. Good call, Daniel admitted grudgingly, though his tone still carried a note of skepticism. Let's keep moving. Inside the new room, the group found themselves surrounded by a series of floating platforms suspended over a deep pit. Across the pit, another door waited, but there was no obvious way to reach it. Each platform had glowing symbols etched into its surface, and the symbols changed color when touched. Some turned blue, others red, and a few air. The next challenge was unlike anything they had faced before. Beyond the locked gate, the group entered a massive chamber that looked more like a jungle than part of the vault. Thick vines hung from the ceiling, and the air was humid and heavy with the scent of damp earth. Strange plants glowed faintly in the dim light, casting an eerie green hue across the room. In the center of the space stood a pedestal with a glowing crystal resting on top. Around it, scattered across the floor, were fragments of what appeared to be broken mirrors. "What is this place?" Rachel whispered, clutching her notebook tightly as she took in the surreal surroundings. Her voice echoed slightly, making the room feel even more alive and unnatural. Emma stepped forward cautiously, her eyes fixed on the pedestal. "That crystal. It has to be important. Maybe it's the key to getting out of here." Daniel crossed his arms, scanning the area for threats. "It's too easy. There's no way they'd just leave it sitting there for us to grab." Lucas crouched down to examine one of the mirror fragments. "Look at these. They're not normal mirrors. They're reflecting things that aren't even here." He pointed to a shard showing an image of a barren desert, though the rest of the room remained unchanged behind him. Emma frowned, piecing together the puzzle in her mind. "This isn't about taking the crystal. It's about fixing something. Those mirrors, they must have been whole at some point. If we put them back together, maybe it'll unlock whatever comes next." Rachel nodded slowly. "That makes sense. But how do we know which pieces go where? There are dozens of them." "We'll figure it out," Emma said firmly. She picked up one of the shards and held it up to the light. The reflection shifted, revealing a distorted image of herself. It was unsettling, but she forced herself to focus. "Let's spread out and collect all the pieces first. Then we can try assembling them." The group split up, gathering the fragments carefully. The task was tedious, and the oppressive atmosphere of the room didn't help. Every so often, the glowing plants would pulse brighter, as if reacting to their movements. Once, Lucas swore. He heard whispers coming from the vines, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there. When they had collected all the shards, they regrouped around the pedestal. Emma laid the pieces out on the ground, examining each one closely. Some fit together easily, forming sections of the larger mirror, while others required careful adjustment. As they worked, the reflections began to change, showing glimpses of familiar places, cities reduced to rubble, forests consumed by fire, oceans choked with debris. These images, they're warnings, Rachel murmured, her voice trembling. "They're showing us what happens if we fail." Emma glanced at her, seeing the fear in her eyes. "We won't fail," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Keep going." As the mirror neared completion, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. The glowing plants pulsed erratically, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently, causing everyone to stumble. A section of the floor cracked open, revealing a pit filled with writhing shadows that seemed to reach out toward them. "Hurry," Daniel shouted, steadying himself against the pedestal. "We don't have much time." Emma's hands trembled as she placed the final shard into position. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the mirror flared to life, projecting a beam of light directly onto the crystal. The crystal absorbed the light, glowing brighter until it emitted a high-pitched hum. The shaking stopped, and the shadows retreated back into the pit. A hidden door slid open nearby, revealing a narrow staircase, leading downward. The group exchanged wary glances but didn't hesitate to move forward. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a long, dimly lit hallway lined with doors. Each door bore a symbol etched into its surface, some recognizable, others completely alien. Above the doors, a message blinked in red letters. Choose wisely. Only one path leads to salvation. This feels like a trap, Lucas muttered, glaring at the doors suspiciously. How are we supposed to know which one is right? Emma stepped closer, studying the symbols carefully. These aren't random. They represent different concepts: strength, wisdom, courage, sacrifice. It's testing us again. Daniel frowned. So we pick based on what we think matters most? That's subjective. No, Emma said thoughtfully. It's about balance. We need to combine our strengths. One person alone can't solve this. We have to decide together. Rachel nodded, flipping through her notes. If we think about what's gotten us this far, it's teamwork. None of us could have made it this far alone. Lucas sighed. Fine. So which door does that leave us with? Emma pointed to a door marked with an intricate symbol resembling interconnected gears. That one. It represents collaboration, the idea that everything works better when it's connected. Without waiting for agreement, she pushed the door open. Beyond it lay another chamber, this one dominated by a massive machine humming with energy. At its center was a control panel covered in buttons, levers, and screens. Above the panel, a countdown timer ticked away relentlessly. Only 5 hours remained. This doesn't look good, Daniel said, eyeing the machinery warily. What's the catch this time? Emma approached the control panel, examining it closely. There's no instruction manual, but I think I see how it works. This machine is designed to simulate resource management, like distributing power or supplies. If we allocate resources correctly, we might be able to stabilize it. Rachel joined her, pointing to a series of dials labeled with categories like food, energy, and water. It's like a scaled-down version of the real world. We have to divide these resources efficiently without letting any category drop to zero. Lucas groaned. Great, a math problem. Just what I needed. Emma ignored him, focusing on the task at hand. We'll take turns monitoring the levels. Rachel, you keep track of the numbers. Daniel, watch for fluctuations in the system. Lucas, see if you can find a way to override any failures. For the next hour, the group worked tirelessly, adjusting the dials and managing the flow of resources. It was a delicate balancing act, and several times they nearly lost control when one category dipped dangerously low. Tensions ran high, especially when Lucas accidentally triggered a surge that caused the entire machine to shudder violently. We're running out of time, Rachel exclaimed, panic creeping into her voice. If we don't stabilize this soon, it's going to shut down completely. Emma gritted her teeth, her fingers flying over the controls. Hold steady. We can do this. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the machine stabilized. The hum grew softer, and the lights in the chamber brightened. A loud click signaled success, and a pathway opened at the far end of the room. We did it, Emma breathed, leaning against the control panel in exhaustion. Let's keep moving. As they stepped through the newly revealed passage, none of them noticed the faint crackle of static coming from their wristbands. Nor did they see the tiny red dots blinking faster on the device's displays. The vault wasn't done with them yet, not by a long shot. The passage led them into a vast open chamber that felt like the inside of a giant dome. The walls were smooth and metallic, curving upward to meet at a point high above their heads. In the center of the room stood a massive tree made entirely of glass. Its branches sparkled under the dim light, and tiny orbs of light floated around, it like fireflies. Beneath the tree was a circular platform with a single lever sticking out of it. What is this place? Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She clutched her notebook tightly as if trying to anchor herself to something familiar in the strange environment. Emma stepped forward cautiously, her eyes fixed on the glass tree. It's beautiful, she murmured, but I don't think it's here just for show. Daniel moved closer to the platform, examining the lever. This has to be important. Maybe pulling it will unlock the next part. Lucas shook his head, frowning. Or it could trigger another trap. Everything so far has been designed to test us or mess with our heads. We can't just rush in. Emma nodded slowly. He's right. Let's look around first. There might be clues we're missing. As they spread out to inspect the room, they noticed intricate carvings etched into the walls. The carvings depicted scenes of people working together, building shelters, sharing food, caring for one another. But interspersed among these images were darker pictures of conflict, betrayal, and loss. These carvings, they're telling a story, Rachel said, tracing her fingers over one of the images. It's like they're showing what happens when people work together, and what happens when they don't. Emma studied the carvings carefully, her brow furrowed in thought. This isn't just decoration, it's a message. The vault is testing more than our problem-solving skills. It's testing whether we can trust each other. Daniel crossed, his arms, his expression skeptical. Trust? That's easy to say, but how do we know everyone here has good intentions? His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Emma glanced at him, then at Lucas and Rachel. She had been wondering the same thing but hadn't wanted to voice it. Tensions had been simmering beneath the surface ever since they entered the vault, and now those tensions threatened to boil over. Lucas sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. Look, I get it. None of us really knows each other, but fighting isn't going to help us survive. If this place is testing. The room was deathly quiet after Dr. Hayes' hologram disappeared, leaving the group to face the impossible decision. The screens around them continued to display images of suffering. Families huddled together in makeshift shelters, fields reduced to dust, cities crumbling into ruin. It was a grim reminder of what awaited humanity if they failed. But now the challenge wasn't about solving puzzles or surviving traps. This time it was personal. Emma stared at the others, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of the situation settling over them like a suffocating blanket. No one spoke for a long moment, each person lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. This is insane, he said, his voice low and tense. They can't expect us to just pick someone to leave behind. Rachel hugged her notebook tightly to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. But we have to. If we don't make a choice, none of us will get out. They'll lock all of us in here. Lucas shook his head, pacing back and forth. There has to be another way. Maybe we can hack the system or find a loophole. We've solved everything. Else, they can't just force us to do this. Emma listened to their arguments but stayed silent, her gaze fixed on the black box still sitting on the pedestal. Something about the way Hayes had phrased the challenge gnawed at her. His words had been deliberate, almost taunting. He wanted them to turn against each other, to see how far they would go when pushed to their limits. We need to think carefully, Emma said finally, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. This isn't just about survival, it's about trust and sacrifice. Daniel turned to her sharply. Sacrifice? You're saying one of us should volunteer? That's not fair. I'm not saying anything yet, Emma replied calmly. But we can't let fear or anger drive our decision. If we start blaming each other, we'll lose sight of why we're here. Rachel nodded slowly, though her hands trembled as she flipped through her notebook. She's right. We need to talk this through, not fight. Lucas stopped pacing and leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples. Fine, let's talk, but I'm not staying behind. The tension in the room thickened, and Emma knew they were running out of time. The clock on the wall showed only 2 hours remaining. Every second they wasted arguing brought them closer to failure and permanent imprisonment. Okay, Emma began, taking a deep breath. Let's look at this logically. Who among us has skills that are most critical for helping humanity? Who can make the biggest difference outside these walls? Daniel crossed his arms, his expression hardening. That's easy. You, Emma. You've been the one solving most of the puzzles. Without you, we wouldn't have made it this far. Emma blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected him to say that, especially given his earlier skepticism. Before she could respond, Rachel chimed in. And Lucas, Rachel added quickly. His tech knowledge is invaluable. If anyone can rebuild systems or create solutions, it's him. Lucas looked down, avoiding eye contact. For once, he didn't argue or boast about his abilities. Instead, he muttered quietly, "What about you, Rachel? You've been keeping track of everything, analyzing patterns. Your brain is worth more than mine." Rachel shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm not strong enough. I'd slow everyone down. Besides, my research isn't practical, it's theoretical. It won't help people right away." The conversation circled back to Daniel, who stood apart from the group, his jaw clenched. He glanced at the others, then at the door leading out of the room. Finally he spoke, his voice firm but tinged with sadness. "It should be me," he said. "I'm expendable. My skills are useful, but they're not unique. You three, you're thinkers, problem solvers. Humanity needs people like you." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but part of her knew he was making sense. Still, the thought of leaving him behind felt unbearable. "No," she said firmly. "We're not doing this. There has to be another way." She stepped toward the pedestal, studying the black box again. Something about it seemed off. The latch was simple, almost too easy to open. Why would the vault design such an elaborate test only to end with something so straightforward? "Wait," Emma said suddenly, her eyes narrowing. "What if this isn't real? What if this whole choose someone thing is another test of teamwork? What if they're watching to see if we stick together, or turn on each other?" Lucas straightened, his expression shifting from frustration to curiosity. "You mean, they're trying to break us?" "Exactly," Emma replied. "Think about it. Everything we've faced so far has been about cooperation. Even when things got tough, we worked together. This feels different. It's designed to divide us." Rachel nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "If that's true, then choosing someone to stay behind would be failing the test. They want us to prove we value each other, even under pressure." Daniel hesitated, his earlier resolve wavering. "So what do we do? Just walk out? Ignore the instructions?" Emma shook her head. "Not exactly. We need to show them we refuse to play their game, but we also need to act fast before time runs out." She turned to the pedestal and closed the black box, latching it securely. Then, she pressed her hand against the surface of the pedestal, searching for any hidden mechanisms. After a few seconds, a small panel slid open, revealing a keypad. "A code," Lucas muttered, stepping closer. "Of course, nothing here is ever simple." Emma studied the keypad, her mind working quickly. If this is the final test, the code has to relate to everything we've done so far. Think about the symbols, the challenges, the lessons we learned. Rachel flipped through her notebook, her eyes scanning the pages. The symbols, strength, wisdom, courage, sacrifice, they were all part of the glass tree test. Emma nodded. "Right. And those qualities represent what we've contributed as a team. Maybe the code is based on those words." Daniel stepped forward, his confidence returning. "Let's try it. Start with strength. That's me. Then wisdom. Rachel. Courage. Lucas. And sacrifice. That's you, Emma." Emma hesitated, feeling a pang of guilt at being associated with sacrifice. But she didn't argue. Instead, she typed the 4 words into the keypad. Strength. Wisdom. Courage. Sacrifice. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the pedestal emitted a soft chime, and the screens around the room flickered off. A hidden door slid open, revealing a bright light beyond. "We did it," Emma whispered, relief washing over her. "We passed the test." The group exchanged stunned looks, then moved toward the exit together. As they stepped into the light, they found themselves back in the briefing room where they had started. Dr. Hayes stood waiting for them, his cold smile sending a shiver down Emma's spine. "Well done," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You've proven yourselves capable of unity, Even in the face through every trial, every challenge, and every moment of doubt, they had held on to hope, and that hope had carried them through. The bright light faded as the group stepped into the briefing room, their eyes adjusting to the sudden change in surroundings. Dr. Alan Hayes stood at the far end of the room, his hands clasped behind his back and a smug smile playing on his lips. Around him, agents in dark suits lined the walls, watching silently as if waiting for something to happen. The air was thick with tension, and Emma could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "Well done," Hayes said, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. "You've proven yourselves capable of unity, even in the face of impossible odds." Emma frowned, studying his expression carefully. His words sounded like praise, but there was something unsettling about the way he looked at them, as if they were pieces in a game he had already won. She glanced at the others, noticing the same unease reflected in their faces. Daniel's jaw was tight. Rachel clutched her notebook nervously, and Lucas shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "What happens now?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. Hayes tilted his head slightly, his cold eyes narrowing. "Now? Now you leave, or so you think." He gestured toward the door behind him. "But before you go, I want you to understand what this trial has truly been about." Emma exchanged a quick glance with the group. Something about his tone made her skin crawl. She braced herself, sensing that the worst was yet to come. This wasn't just a test of intelligence or teamwork, Hayes continued, pacing slowly in front of them. It was a test of loyalty. To yourselves, to each other, and to humanity. We needed to know if you could rise above fear, doubt, and selfishness. And you did, almost flawlessly. "Almost?" Daniel interrupted, his voice sharp. "What does that mean?" Hayes stopped pacing and turned to face them, his smile widening. "It means we learned more than you realized during your time in the vault. Every decision, every word, every action. You revealed parts of yourselves that even you may not fully understand." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She remembered the strange whispers in the jungle room, the distorted reflections in the mirror shards, the blinking red dots on their wristbands. Had they been monitored even more closely than she thought? "What are you saying?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. "That you manipulated us?" "Manipulated," Hayes chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, my dear. We simply observed. The challenges were designed to push you to your limits, not to break you, but to see who you really are under pressure." Lucas stepped forward, his usual sarcasm replaced by genuine anger. "So this whole thing was some kind of psychological expert." The holding area was nothing like the sleek, futuristic rooms they had encountered inside the vault. It was a cold, gray cell with concrete walls and a single metal bench bolted to the floor. The only source of light came from a flickering bulb overhead, casting long shadows across the room. The heavy door slammed shut behind them, leaving Emma, Daniel, Rachel, and Lucas alone in the oppressive silence. For a moment, no one spoke. They sat on the bench, their shoulders slumped, exhaustion etched into their faces. The adrenaline that had fueled their defiance earlier was fading, replaced by the harsh reality of their situation. Despite their best efforts, they were still prisoners trapped in a system they couldn't escape. "This isn't fair," Rachel muttered finally, breaking the silence. Her voice trembled with frustration and fear. "We did everything they asked. We passed every test. Why won't they let us go?" Emma sighed, leaning back against the wall. "Because they don't care about fairness. This whole thing, it's not about helping humanity. It's about control." Daniel nodded grimly, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "They wanted to see how far we'd go, what we'd sacrifice. But now that they've got their answers, they're keeping us locked up anyway, like lab rats." Lucas stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth across the small space. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to decide our fate. There has to be a way out." Emma watched him, her mind racing. She knew he was right. They couldn't afford to give up. But she also knew that blindly rushing into action wouldn't help either. If we try to escape, we need a plan, something smarter than brute force. Rachel flipped through her notebook, scanning the pages filled with notes and sketches from their time in the vault. Maybe there's something we missed, a clue or a pattern we didn't notice before. Everything in there felt connected, like pieces of a bigger puzzle. Emma leaned forward, her interest piqued. What do you mean? Rachel hesitated, flipping to a page covered in scribbles. Remember the symbols? Strength, wisdom, courage, sacrifice. They kept showing up in different challenges. Maybe those aren't just qualities, maybe they're keys to something outside this place. Daniel frowned, scratching his chin thoughtfully. Keys to what? Another door? Another trap? Not necessarily, Emma said slowly, her eyes narrowing as an idea began to form. What if those symbols represent access points, ways to override the system? If we can find where they lead. Lucas stopped pacing and turned to face her. You think we can hack it? Bypass whatever controls this place? It's worth a shot, Emma replied, standing up. But first we need information. Someone must have designed this system, and whoever did probably left traces we can follow. As if on cue, the door creaked open, and a guard stepped inside carrying a tray of food. He set it down without saying a word and turned to leave, but Emma seized the opportunity. Wait, she called out, stepping closer to the guard. Please, we need to know why we're being held. We did everything they asked. Isn't that enough? The guard hesitated, glancing back at her with an unreadable expression. For a moment, Emma thought he might ignore her plea, but then he spoke quietly, his voice barely audible. They're watching you, he said, his tone urgent. Everything you say, everything you do, it's all recorded. Don't trust anyone, not even each other. Before Emma could respond, the guard slipped out of the room, closing the door firmly behind him. The group exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of his warning sinking in. What did he mean? Rachel asked nervously. Why would they record us? And why tell us now? Emma shook her head, her mind working furiously. I don't know, but if they're watching, then we need to be careful. Whatever we plan, we can't discuss it openly. Daniel nodded, lowering his voice. Agreed. From now on, we stick to code words or signals. No direct talk about escaping. Over the next hour, they devised a strategy using subtle gestures and phrases to communicate. Each member of the group took turns observing the guards' routines, noting when meals were delivered, when patrols passed by, and when the corridors seemed quietest. Slowly, they pieced together a rough map of the facility based on their limited observations. Finally, under the cover of darkness, they made their move. Using a shard of broken glass hidden in Lucas's pocket, they managed to pick the lock on their cell door. The process was painstakingly slow, and every click of the tumblers sent a jolt of fear through them. But eventually, the door swung open. We're out, Emma whispered, peering cautiously into the hallway. Now we find the control room. The group moved quickly and quietly, sticking to the shadows as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors. Along the way, they encountered several obstacles: locked doors, security cameras, and even a patrol of guards. But their combined skills proved invaluable. Daniel's strength allowed them to pry open stubborn barriers. Rachel's sharp eye spotted hidden pathways, and Lucas's tech expertise helped disable surveillance systems. When they finally reached the control room, Emma felt a surge of hope. The room was filled with monitors displaying live feeds of various parts of the facility, along with rows of blinking lights and switches. At the center of the room stood a massive console labeled System Override. This is it, Emma said, stepping toward the console. If we can activate the override, we might be able to shut down the entire system. Lucas joined her, pulling out his tablet and connecting it to the console. It'll take me a few minutes to bypass the encryption. Keep an eye out while I work. As Lucas focused on hacking the system, the others positioned themselves at key points around the room, ready to fend off any intruders. Minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. Just as Lucas announced he was almost done, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor outside. They're coming, Rachel hissed, gripping a piece of pipe she had picked up earlier. Emma grabbed a nearby chair, preparing to defend their position. "Stay calm. We've come too far to give up now." The door burst open, and a group of guards stormed in, weapons drawn. But instead of attacking, they froze, staring at the screens behind the group. On the monitors, images of chaos flickered to life, fires spreading, alarms blaring, and systems shutting down across the facility. "What's happening?" one of the guards shouted, panic rising in his voice. "It's too late," Emma said, turning to face them. "You lost control of your own game." With a final keystroke, Lucas activated the override. The room plunged into darkness as the power cut out, leaving only the faint glow of emergency lights. In the confusion, the group slipped past the stunned guards and made their way toward the exit. When they emerged into the cool night air, freedom hit them like a wave. The sky above was clear for the first time in years, dotted with stars that seemed impossibly bright. For a moment, none of them spoke. They simply stood there, breathing deeply and taking in the world they had fought so hard to reclaim. "We did it," Emma said softly, her voice filled with awe. "We're free." But as they looked back at the towering structure of the Vault Initiative, now dark and silent, they knew their fight wasn't over. The organization may have been defeated, for now, but its influence lingered, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power. Emma turned to the others, determination blazing in her eyes. "This isn't the end. We exposed them once and we'll do it again, if we have to. Because if there's one thing we've learned, it's that unity is stronger than fear." And with that, they walked away, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. The days following their escape from the Vault Initiative were a blur of activity. Emma, Daniel, Rachel, and Lucas found themselves thrust into a world that was both familiar and foreign. The air outside felt cleaner, the sky brighter, but the scars of humanity's struggles were everywhere. Abandoned buildings, empty streets, and remnants of protests long past. Despite the challenges, there was also a sense of hope, a quiet determination among the people they encountered to rebuild what had been lost. Emma took charge of documenting everything they had uncovered about the Vault Initiative. She spent hours typing up notes, organizing evidence, and piecing together the clues they had gathered during their time inside. Rachel helped her, meticulously cross-referencing data and creating detailed diagrams of the facility's layout. Together, they compiled a dossier so damning it could bring down the entire organization, if only they could get it into the right hands. Lucas, meanwhile, focused on exposing the Vault Initiative's secrets through technology. Using his tablet and whatever equipment he could scavenge, he hacked into public networks and broadcast snippets of information to anyone who would listen. At first, the messages were met with skepticism, dismissed as conspiracy theories or propaganda. But as more details emerged, names, locations, and recordings of Dr. Hayes's chilling speeches, people began to take notice. Daniel played a different role, acting as the group's protector. He taught them basic self-defense techniques and kept watch for any signs of retaliation from the Vault Initiative. Though he rarely spoke about his experiences as a soldier, his presence was a constant reassurance. When threats arose, and they did often, he was the one who stepped forward, shielding the others while they worked. Despite their progress, tensions lingered beneath the surface. The trauma of their ordeal weighed heavily on each of them, manifesting in sleepless nights and unspoken fears. Emma noticed how Rachel flinched at sudden noises, how Lou,